Thank you all for coming out. I want to give us some context of where we've come from and where we're going, why we're working on Nostr and why we need to build these things. But I also want to give a little bit of a personal history of how I got here and some of the history of how we created Twitter, because people don't realize that it itself was a political and activist project, as much as it was a Silicon Valley startup. So to tell a little bit about my own roots as an activist, I grew up in Northern California. I was around a bunch of people and involved with Earth First, which is a nonviolent direct action movement, doing tree sits and trying to protect the redwoods. And through that work, I saw the need for community organizing, and I saw the need for work on building it. And I looked at how we could use technology for social change. And I've always been inspired by activists around the world. You know, one of the things people don't realize is that we actually had in the Odeo office, when we created Twitter, posters of human rights activists on the walls. There was a poster of Ken Saro-Wiwa on the wall above our desks when we created Twitter. And it was something that we remembered. It was something that was important. It wasn't an accident that people used Twitter for social change, for activism. It wasn't an accident that it was so powerful. But to understand where Twitter came from and then what we're doing now with Nostr, you have to go back and you have to look at what came before it. And in the late 1990s, I helped start a movement called Indie Media. And our idea was that we would create the ability for people to publish photo, video, text, set up community radio stations around the world. And it started in Seattle in 1999. And then we set up a local center in 180 cities all over the world. And this prefigures the emergence of social media. This says that we can build tools where we can use the internet, but where people who are concerned about it can tell their own stories. And one of the first projects we built on that was we had this experiment. We said, what can we do with text messages? How do we use text messages for social change? So we built this prototype called Text Mob, where groups of activists could get together and text message updates of what's going on in other places. And so this was 2004 at the time. And in the place that got most used, the Republican National Convention protests in New York in 2004, thousands of people were able to send and receive text messages to know what was going on in the protest. And that model, that thing that we were playing with, it was super clunky. It was very much hacked together. But what happened was when Odeo, the company that was going to be Twitter, ended up having difficulty advancing a business as a podcasting business, we went to look for other models. And we looked at the activist models that we had been doing outside of work. And we looked at Text Mob. And we said, what if we made this model for direct bottom-up communication something that had more support? What if we put a company behind it? What if we made it easy to use? What if we made it so that instead of just a few activists using it that could then get shut down by the police, we had a whole company and the whole world used it. And people could use it for activism and they can use it for whatever else. And so that's where a lot of the original ideas from Twitter comes from. But there were some major problems in what we had created, which is we were building it within the structure of a company, and we ended up having massive contradictions between the needs of the company and the needs of the users, the needs of society. And so by building and launching it within the structure of a company, we were able to get the resources we needed to build it, but we weren't able to build the kind of freedom technology that's permissionless and open because there was a legal entity you can go after. And so people used it. Activists used it. It was incredibly powerful for changing the world and giving everyone a voice. But it also meant that Twitter, the company, as much as it fought for human rights and for free speech rights, was forced eventually to comply with government orders. And long term, it also meant that it was owned by investors on the stock market, which means there were many, many attempts to take it over with private equity. And so when that happens, we lose the common space. And these sort of moments of control are points where we had to go back to the Twitter trust and safety people and say, please unblock this account and please fix this thing. And we were asking permission and we got lots of help, but it isn't the world you want to list into. You don't want to rely on a corporation doing the right thing because the people running it can change. And that led to us being victims of government-controlled blackouts. It meant that Twitter was a thing you could shut down. And that isn't something we wanted. We wanted it to work like email. We wanted it to work like the web. We wanted it to work like things like Tor that are fundamentally censorship resistant. And so when we have that happen, we realized that we needed to build something new. We needed to build something different. And not just the censorship, but people lose their money. They lose their accounts. The number of times in activist groups where we've had PayPal accounts frozen or deleted, or we had GoFundMe accounts frozen, or we had credit card processing turned off. This happens all the time because they know that they can kneecap movements around it. And so we need tools for organizing that both let me communicate on a grassroots level, but also give you that independence. And we need to build a system that doesn't have a single point of failure. Doesn't have these places where someone is in a corporate C-suite who can make that decision. And even if they are the best ally you can imagine, they're going to be vulnerable because they have priorities. So what do we do with this? How do we escape this sort of corporate decision making? And the answer is we don't build these important infrastructures as corporations. There's spaces for corporations to exist on the platform, but it needs to exist separate from that. It needs to exist like the internet and the web. Because asking permission for these systems creates vulnerability. The moment you need to ask for permission to speak, the moment you need to ask for permission to spend money, the moment you need to ask for permission to connect with others, to organize, it means that people with state power are able to come in and control things. And so we built Nostr. We built an alternative. And we didn't just build Nostr. We built lots and lots of alternatives and lots of protocols, and it took like a decade of trying things and seeing what succeeded and failed. But Nostr is sort of the biggest hope right now, and it's nascent. It's difficult to use, and it's something we are building together. But there's no company at the center of it. There's no one to own it. And there's no one to ask for permission to how to do it. And so you can control your accounts and you have fundamental rights on this. And that's the most important thing, because if we build a system of social change without those rights, we are never going to be able to change the systems of power in society. So how does it work? It's one protocol with many apps. Everything you think of, you can do in Facebook. Everything you think of as Web 2.0, everything you can think of social media can exist within Nostr. And you can use your identity, your keys, your accounts, and you can move between them. And each person gets to choose which apps they want to use and how they want to do them. No company controls the network. There is no Nostr Corporation. There is no Nostr Foundation. There is no single point of systems about it. And so you can use this system how you want, and I don't have a say over it, and you don't have a say over me. Then it doesn't mean that I can't implement a system of trust and safety for my part of the network or for my relay servers. It's that we don't have to agree on those systems, and we can have an autonomous system where the rules when you speak Swahili can be different than the rules you speak in Te Reo Maori in New Zealand. Like, those two communities can set up their own rules and their own systems, and if you're in one of those languages or cultures and you want to split it off, you can. It gives you the power. You can communicate without permission. This is so important. Like, this is what gives us the power to build alternative political and power structures that aren't vulnerable to control. And it's all connected through a protocol. A protocol like email and the web, these are things that we know they work. And somehow with the advent of Web 2.0, we went from an internet based on protocol to an internet based on centralized control and centralized systems and a centralized database. And we lost our power. So there's, I encourage you to take a look at Nostr. There's all sorts of social applications. Some of them are really well built. Some of them are very much for hackers, but everything you think of, you can do. One of the things we built last week was a new social app called Chorus, which was announced here. And the idea behind that is it is a Reddit-style community app, but that the groups themselves have a wallet. And so we are combining the community aspect with the crowdfunding aspect of it. And it has a wallet that is completely, completely non-custodial, completely controlled by you. And so someone else can't take your money away. And we built that with Cashew, which is a e-cash system that syncs via Lightning. And we like it because it lets every community on the system set up and run their own bank. When we build these things and how we build them, it's really important to realize that it's about empowering users, empowering individual users, empowering communities of users, so that they can make their own decisions about their lives. And so that we're no longer dependent on a few billionaire CEOs deciding things for everybody. And, I say that's ironically because, Jack Dorsey is involved in this project and he's funding it, but he's never taken a bit of equity. He's never issued a bit of control about this. The funding that we're doing, the funding we're putting into this is about building an autonomous system that doesn't ask us or anyone else to put in control. We're trying to build a system that doesn't have any kings and presidents. The internet, with its IETF, was built on a series of protocols. And IETF, the Internet Unitary Task Force, has a motto, which is we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. That is what got us the internet today. That is what has got us these freedoms. And so what we're building going forward is on top of that, consistent with that, not an internet of a few small monopolies. And in doing this work, I am launching a campaign for social media rights. And I'm doing it because so much of the time people just talk about your data and your privacy, your data and your privacy. And I think there's so much more important stuff out there that we need to think about. Privacy, security, yep, that's super important. But ownership is important too. Do you own your data? Do you own your social relationships? Do you own your identity? Can someone take your name away from you? Because that happens all the time. Do you own the right to communicate what you want to communicate so that there's no one restricting you putting a link in your own text? Is it interoperable? Can you interoperate between things? Can you leave between systems? Or is it a system that's locked down? Do users get algorithmic transparency and control? Do they get a say over what they're building? And most importantly, is there self-governance of your own spaces? Can you decide the rules for what behavior and speech and actions make sense in your communities online? Because so much of the world we have today with social media are a set of opaque rules created by a single person dealing with very complicated problems that they can't make sense of the context. And that's not the democratic future I want. And so I'm pushing forward and I'm advocating for this, and I want everybody to consider, regardless of whether or not you use Nostr, that every system you use considers what these basic rights are and how we can demand them. And we should be demanding them of open source things, we should be demanding of the platforms, but we can also demand them of the internet platforms that claim to be the good guys. We can demand them of Substack. We can demand them of Medium. We can demand them of Reddit. Like, there are corporations that we should work together with. And so I'm going to wrap this up, which is we can build a better world, and we can do it together. In the 1990s, when I said, I want to use technology to help activism, I want to use technology to change the world, I looked at a world where the only voice you had was on CNN. And what you could get a journalist at the New York Times to cover. And if you didn't get on CNN, if you didn't get in the New York Times, you did not exist. But we went and we built the tools. We built the platforms. We built a new world, which is radically democratic. And it's not perfect, but we're all here. I went on CNN a couple weeks ago for a documentary film on the history of Twitter, Breaking the Bird. And it had no impact in the world. We had slayed CNN. No one saw that live interview in prime time on CNN because everybody is looking on and using the things we built. We can do that again, and I encourage you to take a look at what we're doing and build it together with me. Thank you very much.